research, and I'm over the 4 through 8 basic math programs.
Hi, I'm Denise McCowan. I'm from Midland College, and I'm the Department Chair for Education and Child Development.
Hello, I'm Lisa Ramos. I teach at the Alamo Colleges, San Antonio College. I was actually the co-chair for the History Field of Study Advisory Committee, and I'm not on this committee. I'm here to testify about one of the fields of study. If anyone has questions about what it means to be a co-chair, I can answer them.
Amy Jones, Blinn College Child Development Program Coordinator and Education Program Coordinator.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Consalvo. I'm an associate professor at the University of Texas at Tyler, and I teach graduate and undergraduate courses in literacy, focus on adolescent literacy.
I'm Susie Croson from Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, and I'm professor of English.
I'm Daphne Curry from Midwestern State University. I go by Leanne, though, please, and that's in Wichita Falls, Texas. And I am the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Learning, and also the director of Educator Prep.
Hi, I'm Courtney Howdeggy. I'm a professor of education at Collin College.
Good afternoon. I'm James Talese from University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, and I'm a professor of mathematics education.
I'm Amy DeLeon. I'm a professor of teacher education at Palo Alto College, which is one of the Alamo colleges, and I also am the program lead for our college. And I'm interested in co-chairing.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you all. Like I said before, it's really an impressive cross-section of institutions and regions and missions across the state, so I'm really pleased that it worked out this way. It's a great opportunity for four-year institution faculty and two-year institution faculty to be on the same committees and talk to each other face-to-face. It doesn't really happen very often. And I hope that today will be a productive time for the institutions to all communicate to one another the strengths and weaknesses of the curricula and what it is that students need to know in order to be successful at the upper division when they transfer. We need to appoint a recording secretary. This isn't a terribly onerous task. It's just if you've got your computer with you anyway and you're taking some notes anyway, it would be helpful if I had someone to shadow me in my notes, because sometimes I'm talking and not taking notes, or I miss something, or I can take notes while you're talking and you may miss something. Hopefully, if we get some technical glitches worked out, this will all be recorded and preserved on YouTube so that you and your colleagues can go back and watch this meeting so we can correct anything that we might be missing in the notes. But if we have any volunteers of someone who would like to help me take notes for the meeting, it would be tremendously, greatly appreciated. Do we have any volunteers? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let the record show that Saint Belinda Flores will, for today, will help us take notes. So thank you as our secretary. Now, the co-chairs, I'm sorry, I should have said more about it from the beginning. I apologize for that. I wasn't trying to be deliberately coy, although maybe it was good it worked out that way. What the co-chairs do is they run this meeting. I'm here and other coordinating board staff are here as a resource. We can point you in some directions, but the co-chairs are the ones who will decide what we will address in the meeting, when we will address it. They will call on people, they will manage the discussion, they will make sure that all the opinions are expressed and heard fairly throughout the committee meeting. When we take a break, when the committee chairs are elected, I'll take a little 15 minutes with them to talk to them about some of the duties and responsibilities and give them some tips on how meetings like this run. For example, I anticipate that today we will break down into subcommittees to consider different fields of study or different requirements necessary for different levels of certification. That's the kind of thing that co-chairs would do. The co-chairs would decide, do we need subcommittees? If so, how many? And if so, they will lead a conversation about what will be the way we will divide this up. Will it be EC through 3, 4 to 8, 9 to 12, well, we have 2 subcommittees, secondary and primary, right? Are we going to divide this up by subject areas? Those would be the kinds of things that the co-chairs will help manage and lead a discussion in how we collectively decide to approach this. After the meetings are over, the co-chairs will probably help me draft and approve the minutes. They will help me deal with any miscellaneous business that comes up in the approval process as this gets through the board. Hopefully you will authorize the co-chairs in a vote to do some committee business on your behalf so that we don't have to call everybody back for a meeting for just some simple business like approving minor changes in wording or approving edits. When the public comments come in, and they will come in, the co-chairs will help me create a ballot out of those public comments that I will send to each of you to help to decide yes or no you want to approve or reject this recommendation. It'll be things like that. Lisa Ramos here is the co-chair of our history committee. Would you like to add anything to that, or?
I guess for me, the experience was very valuable and useful. I learned a lot about designing degree plans, and one of the things we do is we definitely try to be inclusive, call on people, make sure everyone's been heard, and try to ask for clarifications. That's one of the things I did in our meeting. We had our meeting, the history field of study, last Monday, and sometimes people would say things and assume, or maybe not, realize that others don't know. Everyone comes from different fields, so really trying to get clarification, make sure that everyone gets their voices heard. So kind of being a facilitator. And also, we're usually the ones, the co-chairs, who put forward the motions. Once you feel there's been enough discussion, the co-chairs have to make that decision. When does the talking stop and when do we move on? So kind of just making sure it all moves forward so everyone's not here for a long time. And then afterwards, there is some more stuff that goes on. Alan will be sending you all, if you're the co-chair, a copy of the minutes. You have to kind of go through them, little things like that. But it wasn't anything onerous or labor intensive, if anyone's too worried about that.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. So we'll start with the two-year institutions. Do we have any nominations for yourself or for others as a co-chair from representing the community colleges? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, go ahead, Amy. You right?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other nominations? Yes.
I nominate.
Okay. Okay, Sherry Taylor. Where's Sherry Taylor? Oh, back there. Okay, Sherry. Okay, excellent. Any other nominations? Okay, would the two of you like to say a few words about your background or what you'd like to bring to the committee? Amy?
My background, I've been at Palo Alto College. This is my 15th year. I lead our program development and feel like I would love to be able to share my knowledge and be able to be a facilitator for this group if allowed to do so.
Good afternoon. I am in my 9th year full-time at Tarrant County College. Before that, I was an administrator and teacher in middle school. Over the past few years, I've been a part of the Pathways projects, articulation agreements with Texas Tech and Tarleton, other universities. So it would be my pleasure. However, I am fully believing as well that Amy can do it. So either one of us.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any objections to a hand raised vote? Okay. Okay, then all in favor of Amy DeLeon from Alamo Palo Alto College? Your hand, in favor? I see 9. Does that look right? Okay. All in favor of Sharia Taylor from, where is it? Tarrant County College? Raise your hands. Looks like 13, am I correct? Okay, all right, thank you. Sharia Taylor then will serve as our co-chair, and thank you very much, Amy, for volunteering. We appreciate that.
Can we switch places?
Yes, we'll do that in a minute. You were going to switch places during the break here, and I'll ask the two co-chairs to come sit where Amy and James are sitting so that the camera can catch you front and center and everybody can see you. So we'll do that in a minute. Unless James wants to run for co-chair, where we are, then he could stay put. So we'll have nominations then, please, for representatives from the universities, the four-year institutions. Yes, please.
Nominate Patrice Werner. She's from Texas State, which is the largest producer of teachers in the state, and she has served as a chair as well, so I think she has a lot of experience to bring to the committee.
Okay, thank you, Patrice Werner. Is that all right, Patrice? Okay. Any other nominations? Okay. Was that a hand, Crystal? Oh, okay. You got to be careful, all right. Like in an auction, you don't want to like it. Okay, so all in favor of Patrice Werner from Texas State University? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Patrice. Excellent. So now, before we take a break, I would like we have a period here for public testimony. And Lisa Ramos has come to join us. She, as you know, was the co-chair of the History Committee, and she would like to talk to you about some issues that came up in the History Committee. As a little background, what happened with the History Committee, History Field of Study Committee, is history decided that there needed to be two fields of study in history. There needed to be an academic track and a teacher certification track, so that those students who planned on going on to be teachers in history had to take a slightly different selection of lower division courses than going into academic study. Occasionally this has happened with field of study committees here. Kinesiology is another one that decided they needed to have a teaching track and an academic track and also a pre-professional track. They have three fields of study within kinesiology. Not all fields do this. I think mathematics did it as well. They had a teaching track that was different from the academic track. The History Committee decided they put forward a teaching track, and then it went out for public comment, as fields of study always do. A number of public comments came back saying that the teaching track was insufficient. There were lots of complaints about the teaching track. So the History Committee decided that they did not collectively have the expertise in secondary teaching to be able to determine what the field of study should be for the teaching track. So they authorized the formation of a subcommittee. And we assembled a subcommittee here from the coordinating board of nominations that went out all across the state of people who could serve on specifically teacher track history subcommittee. So we had 24 members from all across the state who were experts in the teaching of history at the secondary level, and they came up with a proposed field of study. The History Committee reconvened last Monday and considered their recommendations. And I'll show you what their recommendations were before I turn it over to Lisa to give you some context. Okay. The History Subcommittee, the History Teaching Track Subcommittee recommended that United States History 1 and United States History 2 be offered with an option that students could take either U.S. History 1 or they could take Mexican American History 1. And that students could also choose between United States History 2 and Mexican American History 2. The main committee, after extended discussion that went on for several hours, they gave us a very thorough discussion. They talked about the requirements of what students needed to know for the certification in U.S. history. And their decision was that just U.S. history 1 and 2 prepared students most thoroughly for that part of the certification exam. So it was a controversial decision after much discussion. And Lisa Ramos, now I'll turn it over to you to talk about why you're here and what you want to say about that.
Certainly. Thank you all for giving me this time. I'll try to be clear and concise, and I welcome any questions or clarifications after my comments. So there's one more field of study that Alan and I were talking about. We don't know who's going to decide it. It might be you all, and that's why I'm here. So as Alan mentioned, there's the history field of study that's called the academic one. So somebody who maybe wants to teach at the university level, or maybe just doesn't want to teach. And then there's this one, the history teacher certification track. And then there's one more. There's the social studies composite teacher certification track. And actually, one of the things that my history field of study committee decided is that we're going to punt that to you all and feel that maybe you all could better decide that. Why did we decide that? Because I've got a copy of the certification exam for social studies composite. It has 7 domains that include world, U.S., Texas history, but also geography, government, economics, and social studies foundations. And there was no one on the history field of study committee that felt informed enough to decide what, if any, econ, geography, government courses should be included. So we felt that this committee might be better able to decide what goes in that social studies composite teacher certification track. But if you all decide that you don't want to do it, or you need to have a meeting with those of us on the history committee, I guess that's something we'll have to figure out. So just a little bit of background there. Who am I and why am I even here? Okay, so I didn't mention that I'm an assistant professor of history at San Antonio College, and I'm also the coordinator for Mexican American Studies. So why I'm here is that, unfortunately, I was one of the people who wanted to have an option of Mexican American History 1 and 2. Option, I really want to emphasize that word. We're asking for options for the few students who are going to want to teach the new Mexican American Studies class, which was recently approved by the State Board of Education, which should be rolled out in the next, I'm guessing, 2 or 3 years. So what we're asking those of us who teach Mexican American history or Mexican American studies is that all of these pathways include options, because there were, if I remember correctly, about 454 students in the state of Texas, 454 who took a Mexican American Studies class at the high school level, mostly in the Houston area, Lower Rio Grande Valley, in San Antonio as well. And this is a class that is slowly but surely growing. And at the community college level, I helped start the Mexican American Studies program at San Antonio College 2 years ago, and we're seeing that students are really interested in these classes. Palo Alto College was the first Alamo colleges to have Mexican American Studies, and they've been quite successful, as has Northwest Vista. So there's more and more community colleges offering these classes, Mexican American history. There's also African American history, and I also want to speak a little bit to that too, because the difference between Mexican American history and African American history is Mexican American history has 2 courses, African American history has 1. And I think in the future I would advise that African American history be set up as 2 so that it can possibly also substitute. But the reason I think it's important to have an option of Mexican American history, as I've said, they're students, they're few, but they're very passionate. I've seen them in my classes. They come in saying, I never knew anything about my culture. I never knew that this happened. Sometimes they get mad, but then they want to do something. And they say, I want to teach Mexican American history in the high school. I want people to know this early. And so I'm here most of all to stand up for those students. Those students are going to be more and more, and if they don't have that option to take Mexican American history, what's going to happen? They're going to give up. They're going to say, well, The advisor's telling me not to take that class. They're telling me it's not counting, so I don't want to jeopardize my certification. It's only going to count as an elective. Universities don't want too many electives to transfer. So I'm asking, I'm even begging for you to, when you decide these teacher certification plans, whether it's by discipline or whether it's by the certification or grade level, to keep options open, not to make them narrow, to have ORs on there, U.S. History 1 or Mexican American History. Some of the people who disagree with me will say, no, we think that all students who are history majors need to take at the minimum, U.S. History 1 and 2, World Civ 1 and 2. And my argument to that is I get that. I get that we want students to have as much knowledge of history, broadly speaking. But some students, again, it's few, but I'm here to speak for them, are going to want to teach at the high school level. They're going to want to teach U.S. history, Mexican American history, and U.S. government. So for their future career, if there's a student who wants to take Mexican American history and teach those 3 classes at the high school, it's okay that they haven't taken world. And you do actually get some world history and Mexican American history 1 and 2. I've been teaching it for the past 2 years. And we do a lot of Mesoamerican civilizations. We do a lot of Mexican history. We even do sometimes comparative with what's going on in the Caribbean. So there is some sort of internationalization or globalization of Mexican American history. There's also a lot of Texas history in it, and there's also a lot of U.S. Of course, it's not going to be as in-depth as a U.S. history class is, and Mexican American history won't be as in-depth, but it offers breadth. So besides options, I please ask you to remember that Mexican American history students will be able to do well in the world history, the U.S. history, the Texas history, and dare I say even the government and citizenship section of the social studies composite, because they're getting a little bit in those 4 areas, whereas someone who's just taking U.S. history is going to mostly have the coverage for 1 of the 7 domains. So I would say that Mexican American history does prepare students for the certification exam. I have a copy of the exam. I took 10 questions out of it, and my Mexican American history helped me answer questions on Cortés and Spanish imperialism, the colonization of, the so-called New World, etc. Students love these classes. They say, I never thought about westward movement from another perspective. I never thought about the northward movement. I never thought about the indigenous civilizations that were already there. And in Mexican American history, that they get that counter narrative. So it helps them even with the social studies foundations and the critical thinking skills. So that's another reason the classes are valuable. They can and they do prepare students for the exam. And lastly, one of the other concerns was, well, Mexican American history is a 2,000 level class. At my university, we teach Mexican American history at the 3,000 level. My answer to that is Mexican American history, like Texas history, U.S. history, they're surveys. So for the universities, I would say if you're offering Mexican American history at the 3,000 level, you should really be offering something more specialized. Something like Mexican American women's history, or Mexican Americans in the 20th century, or Mexican Americans during World War II. So that's another critique that those of us who want Mexican American history as an option we're offering. So lastly, I just want to say that ethnic studies courses such as this, they need to be included, they need to be valued, and they need to be there on the degree plans. If they're not there, advisors are not going to recommend it, and a student who's passionate, who's found their calling and really wants to take these classes and teach it, they're not going to be able to reach that goal. So that's why I came here from San Antonio today, and I'm willing to discuss this now or with anyone via email or phone if you have any questions for me about why this means so much to me and all the students that I'm here representing. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to distribute some materials?
Sorry, I forgot.
Right.
I have a letter if you want to see something that has been signed by about 24 people on what the Mexican American history classes do, why they're important, and I can just pass that out to you all.
Okay. I'll let Lisa pass those out and talk to you for a little while informally if you have any questions for her, while I have a little break here and meet over here at a table with Patrice and Sharia to give them some kind of context and some suggestions. So for those in the booth, we'll... I'm sorry? Well, sure. Let's get those comments on the record. Yeah, that'd be fine. Do we have any questions or comments for Lisa? Yes, Teresa.
This is Teresa Wallace with Vernon College. I do have a comment. I agree that there needs to be something. I don't understand, at least for us, History 1 and 2 are core requirements. Why can Mexican American Studies not be part of the Western Civilization 1-2 option? Because my students are required to take History 1 and 2 for the core. And so the options, I don't understand why Texas history, since it's a 2,000 level course, I think it could be involved in the World Civilization 1 or 2, because a lot of students take it as a humanities. And so why not the Mexican American history? So keep Histories 1 and 2 as part of the core. And Mexican American, African American studies can be part of that Western civilization. And I agree with Lisa. When I was in high school back in the 80s and 90s, I wanted to do Mexican American studies, but there was nothing. And none of the universities offered it where I decided to go to college. And that's still a passion of mine, but like she said, it died because nobody was offering that. And I had to, move all the way to South Texas, and I live in North Texas. So I think it's there. The passion is there. We are becoming a more diverse culture. I think we need to honor that with the African American studies and Mexican American. I think they need to be an option with World Civilization 1 and 2. And that's just my comments. And again, this is Teresa Wallace.
I'd like to also provide a comment because we also have a very strong mixed American studies, and in the surrounding schools, like you mentioned, was mentioned that more and more of the districts want to teach mixed American studies, and there's an assumption, oh, well, you study U.S. history or Texas history, mixed American history, and it's a specialized type of knowledge. In addition to that, we have a summer academy at UTSA, and we've been doing it for free or minimal cost, and we have people from across the state come and attend that summer academy on Mexican American studies, because you see the number of not just high school, middle school teachers who want to teach Mexican American studies and have the knowledge base, but also understand the theoretical background that comes along with teaching ethnic course such as Mexican American studies.
Lisa, any thoughts on that?
Thank you for those comments. I mean, I agree with what Teresa was saying and what I can't see. I don't have my glasses. Belinda said. I did not have the option when I was a student in late 80s, early 90s to do Mexican American history. I remember my high school, James Pace High School, Brownsville, Texas. I got excited because my English teacher said, I talked to the principal about having Mexican American literature next year. So this would have been about 1990. And he said, why do we, I'm not going to name names. Why do we need this? This is a predominantly Mexican American town. They don't need to know this. And I was disappointed. And I think there's been such a great effort by those who teach Mexican American history at the university, community college, elementary through high school level to bring these classes. I know people who teach them at all those levels, and they've done great things before the State Board of Education. And we need to make sure that these classes aren't seen as just these side courses or second-class courses. They need to be options. Most students are not going to do it. Most students are going to do the U.S. and the World Civ, so fine, that works for them. But for the few who want to do something different, we need to have those options. And I passionately believe that, and I will defend that until forever. So if anyone wants to hear more, I'm definitely open to discussion. I'm definitely open to people who have different points of view. I'm not one of those people who just closes off and just doesn't hear the other side. I do. So I welcome anyone who wants to email me, contact me for more information. Thank you all.
Any other thoughts or comments for Dr. Yes, please, Barbara.
Hi, this is Barbara Lynn from Wharton County Junior College, and another thought that just came to mind is when I was a freshman in college, I had placed out of the American history through testing. And what the college, it was Texas Women's University, they didn't recognize that, but they offered me other histories to honors courses, and so that's another way to look at it, that, you know, students who, you know, taking it as dual credit or whatever, once I had mastered the American history, I didn't take it in college, I took women's studies, was that. So that's just another option that we might think about.
This teaching track is currently, right now, up for public comment. So I encourage you and your colleagues, if you're interested in submitting any public comment, which will go to the committee for consideration on the teaching track, to please let us know. You can send that. This memo went out to coordinating board liaisons and all presidents and CAOs and CIOs. And if you have any comments, please submit them by February 10th. And you can send them to the address here, which is FOS.contact, fieldofstudy.contact at thecb.state.tex.us, or you can just send them to me and I'll make sure they get in the right place. If you or your colleagues have anything you'd like to have on the record by February 10th. For example, Dr. Wallace, if you wanted to put what you said in writing, then if you email that, I'll make sure that the history committee sees that as part of their public comments. Okay. They're not on the website. No, it went out as a memo. Don't believe it's on the website. I wish it were on the website. I'll just mail it to you. I'll email everybody on the committee a copy of this, and you can forward it along as you see fit or use it. Okay, that's a good idea. Okay, so for those in the booth, we'll adjourn for about 10 minutes while sorry, Lisa?
Question, was
yes,
this
please.
sent to us? Is this in any documentation that we received?
No, that was just distributed. That Lisa brought that with her this morning.
So if we want to forward the content to people like Angela Valenzuela and, I mean, it's already signed, so we just want to make sure Luis Orrieta and others get access to the content.
That'd be fine. Yeah, if you would like a digital copy of what you just got, if Lisa will send that to me, I'll forward it to everybody on the committee. That's a great idea. Okay, thank you. So for those in the booth, we'll adjourn till about 1:50 or maybe 1:55 to talk about co-chair stuff. And Lisa will still be here if you would like to speak with her, or you could just take a break and a stretch, and we will reconvene here shortly. Okay, thank you. Study is, and what a field of study isn't, and how it works.
I don't think the mic is on.
I have this kind of Davis. Thank you. As I was saying, I'd like to, while the co-chairs are discussing things over here, I'd like to give you a brief, I promise I'll keep it brief, intro about what a field of study is and what a field of study isn't, and what it is exactly that we're doing today, and the reasons why we're doing this, and why the coordinating board in the state of Texas has invested so much in this field of study initiative. Here's what the field of study is according to the Texas Education Code. I know this is a dull way to start, but it's really important, I think, to read this as it is in the text. If a student successfully completes a field of study curriculum developed by the board, that block of courses may be transferred to a general academic teaching institution and must be substituted for that institution's lower division requirements for the degree program for the field of study into which the student transfers, and the student shall receive full academic credit towards the degree program for the block of courses transferred. Now, the way to get into that, I think, is to look at these two key words. Substituted means that the field of study is the complete list of all the lower division courses required for the major. So receiving institutions cannot add any additional lower division requirements beyond the completed field of study. That's the key point. That's sometimes a controversial point. That sometimes comes as some bad news to some four-year institutions, okay? The four-year institutions cannot add anything to the field of study, so that when a student is finished with their lower division requirements in the field of study, they're finished with their lower division requirements regardless of where they transfer to any public institution across the state. That includes prerequisites. So if there's an upper division course that has a prerequisite at the lower division, and a transfer student comes in with a completed field of study, the university cannot require that student to take that prerequisite. Okay? That's why these committees are important. They need to consider what courses are taught at the upper division level for this major. What are the prerequisites for those courses? What are the courses that, even if they're not prerequisites, what are the ones that best prepare students to succeed in those upper division level courses? And those are the courses that you need to be considering requiring for every transfer student across the state. Okay? Now, what degree program here means when it says that the student shall receive full academic credit towards a degree program, that includes the entire 120-hour semester degree program, which means field of study courses can count as core curriculum options, they can count as requirements for the major, they can count as designated electives, but they need to fit into the 120-hour degree program. Okay? We'll talk about this more in a bit. So a completed block of field of study courses transfers as a block, just like the core curriculum. When you're done at one school, you're done at all schools. So it's just like it is now if you've done the core curriculum at Texas Tech and you transfer to University of Houston downtown, even if University of Houston downtown has different selections for their core curriculum options, it doesn't matter. When you're core complete, you're core complete. That's how the field of study works. When your field of study complete, you're complete, even if the institution that you're transferring to has a different selection of lower division requirements for their native students. Okay. Now, if a student completes only part of the field of study and they transfer before they're finished with it, then the courses they did complete must transfer into that degree program and apply towards a degree. Okay. If a student transfers before they complete a field of study, they can get an associate degree if they have 60 hours, if they have completed the core curriculum or a board-approved field of study. The reason why that's there is because there are a few fields of study that you cannot complete along with the 42-hour core and still get it all done in 60 hours. Like the architecture field of study is like 32 semester credit hours. There's no way you can do that in 60 hours with the core. So there's a way where that student can still get their associate degree for earning their 60 hours. If the transfer student transfers before they complete 60 hours and they've still done the whole field of study, they can get a certificate for that. Okay. This is part of a portfolio of things the coordinating board is doing to help transfer students. Okay, we require degree plan and advising when students accumulate 30 semester credit hours. We have a transferable 42-hour statewide core curriculum required of all students. We have a lower division academic course guide manual, which from now on I'll refer to as the ACGM, which I know you're all familiar with, which is the catalog of courses that are guaranteed to transfer from institution to institution across the state and guaranteed to be funded. We have a common course numbering system. Not everybody uses it, but everybody at least maps to it. And we have programs of study, which is not to be confused with fields of study. Programs of study are workforce courses. They are to workforce courses what fields of study are to academic programs. Field programs of study committees meet much like this one, only they are drawn not just from academics, but are also drawn from secondary school teachers and also representatives from the workforce to help put together a curricula that is guaranteed to transfer and guaranteed to create a nice, smooth pipeline from high school straight into workforce courses, straight into the workforce, so that students take a minimum amount of floundering around trying to just guess what courses they need. Okay. Now, in case you haven't noticed, because you're surrounded by posters with it, the coordinating board is dead serious about this 60 by 30 strategic plan for the state of Texas. This is the master plan for higher education in the whole state and where we're going by the year 2030 and exactly how we plan to get there. If you're not already familiar with it, I highly encourage you to get familiar with how this works and to look at your own institution and see how your department and how your students can help contribute towards these really crucial goals. There are 4 goals that are up here, okay? I know they're going to be already familiar to many of you. I won't dwell on all this, but I'd like to isolate just a few of these goals and illustrate why exactly it is that fields of study are being used to try to contribute to where Texas as a state is trying to arrive at by 2030. Okay? 2 of these goals are about completion goals. By 2030, we want at least 60% of Texans to have a certificate or a degree. And by 2030, in the year 2030, we want at least 550,000 students to complete a certificate, associate, or some sort of degree in higher education in Texas. Okay. Now, where we are with that now is that completion rates and time to degree rates for transfer students consistently lag behind those for native students. When I say native student, I mean, of course, a student who began at the same institution that they graduate from, an increasingly rare breed. Transfer student are those, of course, who start at a community college and transfer over later. The 8-year average for the latest data available showed the completion rate was 84% for native students, but far below that, 67% for transfer students. So what's happening? Okay. Now, institutions across Texas, of course, have been highly creative and brilliant about this, really. They are bending over backwards to do things for their transfer students. So we're not saying that this is some sort of failure on the part of universities if they don't want their transfer students to succeed. Far, far from that. Right? There are lots of really innovative things going on, and the coordinating board is trying to do what it can at the statewide level to augment and amplify the things that are being done by institutions at the local level. Okay. Now, this is going to require some degree pathways that minimize the time and hours to degree. Okay, that's the goal. How can we get students to guarantee that they're going to graduate by letting them do it in less time? Okay, and fewer hours to the degree. The statewide average is 5.5 years to graduate with 10 semesters and 135 approximately semester credit hours attempted. That's for native students. Now look at what it is for the transfer students. Instead of 5.5 years to graduate, it's 7.6 years to graduate. 2 full years more to get the same degree if you're a transfer student. 2 years of your life. Now, they're not taking that many more semesters and that many more semester credit hours. So the obvious answer there is that transfer students are taking fewer courses per semester. Or it could also mean that they're attempting courses that they're not completing. Okay. So here's the next goal. We want students to identify with students to graduate with identifiable, marketable skills. So fields of study curricula are designed by faculty in the discipline who consider each course and how it helps students in the major and how those majors in turn lead to careers. I've already spoken about what programs of study are and how they contribute to this goal as well. Okay. Here's the next goal. We want undergraduate student loan debt to not exceed 60% of first-year wages by the year 2030. That's a pretty ambitious goal because, as you know now, student debt rates are crazy through the roof. All right. How we can try to do that, we're just about out of solutions with that. I mean, it's hard to tell institutions to keep cutting their budgets and reducing tuition when the state, of course, isn't adding anything to help after we've reduced student tuition. So that has been cut just about as close to the bone as it's going to get. Right? There's just not a whole lot lower that tuition and fees can really go for most institutions. So what else can you do? Well, you can try to save students from taking courses that don't apply to their degrees, right? To get the students the most value for their tuition dollar. And how you can do that is, look at these stats here. But native students took an average of 14 attempted semester credit hours. Transfer students took 22 excess semester credit hours. That's just the average, right? 22 semester credit hours is almost a full academic year, right? Those are the courses that transfer students took that did not apply to their degree. I don't know why. They're excess hours. Either they took courses that weren't going to transfer, they took courses for pleasure or for fun or enlightenment, or they changed their mind. They started with one major, changed their mind, went to another major. There are lots of reasons, and they're not all bad. I mean, we're not saying that this is something that is a mark of shame or something we should blame a student for, taking excess semester credit hours. We all probably took a few extra semester credit hours and probably had a lot of fun doing it. But nevertheless, it's expensive. An entire academic year of tuition, fees, living expenses, books, daycare, not contributing to your retirement plan, not making a salary, a year of your life is being spent taking courses that don't work towards your degree for transfer students. And that's the average. Half the students are taking more than this, okay? So this is where the field of study comes in. The field of study, every course in it is guaranteed to transfer and apply to the degree program. So students who take a field of study will know exactly what courses to take, and by omission, what courses not to take as soon as they enroll, or even as soon as they begin taking dual credit courses. Because there are some times when FOS courses overlap with the core, which overlaps with what's available in dual credit. Okay. Here's how much this money can run up. Okay. Say, for example, you take a course at a community college that you think is going to apply to your degree. You transfer to a university, and they tell you, no, you didn't need to take that one. You need to take this one. So take this course instead, and the student does that. So they've taken 2 courses to check off 1 box on their degree plan. You follow me? Here's what this costs on average. Okay. If a student just takes 1 course at a community college and then takes the parallel course that they should have taken at the university, they're out over $1,000, $1,100. Now remember what I said, the average is 7, okay? The average was 22 semester credit hours of courses that were in excess what they didn't need for their degree. If you take 7 courses, which is 21 semester credit hours, you're out almost $8,000. And again, that's the average. Half the students are racking up debt even more than this. So this is why field of study is important to us at the coordinating board and to the state legislature, which is where this is coming from, by the way. The legislature said that transfer issues were going to be crucial as a way to try to reduce student debt and help rising university costs. There was a draft legislation in the last legislative session that aimed for 25 of these to be completed by the time the new session is gavelled in this month. The coordinating board was on tight schedule to try to reach that goal, and we're just about there. These are the fields of study that we've already completed, the various disciplines that have been approved or are currently about to be revised. And these are the ones that are in the hopper now. These are the ones that we're working on and that will be approved before too long. And these are the ones, I should have moved multidisciplinary studies to our proposed in the hopper ones, but I guess that doesn't count yet because we're not finished. These are the meetings for later in 2019 that we have coming up. Okay, so this shows you the spectrum of degree disciplines that we're trying to do. Now, there won't be fields of study for every major in Texas because not every major in Texas attracts enough transfer students to really make it worthwhile. If there's only 10 or 12 transfer students a year in certain small fields, we're probably not going to mess with that. But we've identified the top 50 majors that are popular with transfer students, and we are aiming to have a field of study and development for all 50 of those. Okay. Now, these committee meetings, here's what we do and why you've seen why we're doing it, and here's what it is we're going to do. We need to decide on which lower division courses are absolutely necessary for success in the upper division courses for the major. We need to review the curricula from programs at representative institutions to draw upon their collective experience and wisdom for what it is they want their students to be doing at the upper division level. I sent you a list, as imperfect as it is, that was a little checklist of the courses that are most frequently offered at the top 10 transfer receiving institutions. Those, you notice, aren't necessarily the biggest institutions, but they're the ones that receive the most transfer students from multidisciplinary studies. So we need to think about what it is those universities are already offering at the lower division and try to find courses that will be the least inconvenient for the most number of institutions to accommodate into their degree programs, and balance that carefully with that first bullet point, which is to decide what it is students really, truly need. That's got to be our top priority. Because other institutions, if we decide to put a course in a field of study or an AAT degree that many institutions are not offering, they will offer it in the future if it's in the field of study over time. It may take a little while for the two to congeal, and it's going to take a lot of, sometimes some real heartburn at universities to make adjustments to their curriculum. But this is a painful process sometimes, but it's an important one. And hopefully we can get the institutions to align what they're doing with their native students with what they're doing to the transfers for their transfer students as time goes by. And we will review these fields of study at least every 5 years, probably even more, in some fields more than that. But every 3 to 5 years, these will be reviewed to make sure that they're effective and being used and working, and we're going to keep careful note of any problems that institutions have along the way. And part of your job, by the way, I should say, as a committee member, is to be kind of an ambassador for the field of study to your institution and to your district and to your system. So please solicit opinions from your colleagues as these work. Keep your ear close to the ground of any problems that you're hearing from your transfer students, from the universities, any problems or issues or enthusiasms that you hear from curricula committees at the universities as they adjust their lower division curricula to accommodate the field of study. And keep all these ideas and forward them to me, or keep a folder for yourself. And I want to be sure that we keep our finger on the pulse here. James? Sure.
Yeah, I have a question about what would be the role of the EdTPA in all this planning and field of studies? Because oftentimes what we do often is take a look at the certification requirements and the certification exams. So if we're moving to EdTPA, how will that affect what we decide?
Well, let me introduce our Assistant Commissioner, Rex Peebles, who's behind you. He is our Assistant Commissioner for Academic Equality and Workforce, and he has served on these committees, and he can probably best answer that.
Well, maybe. I'll give it a shot. So first of all, is there anyone here, and I wouldn't recognize you if you were, so it's been too long. Is there anyone here who served on the very first AAT committee?
I was.
Well, I remember your name. Yeah, okay. So,
I was.
all right, I'm sure you haven't changed a bit.
Not a bit. Gotten younger.
And I'm sure I've changed a lot. So I also served on the very first AAT committee. So actually this work is kind of, this particular field of study is kind of near and dear to me for 3 reasons. One is because I served on the very first one, and I was the only member of the committee that wasn't from an education background. All the 4-year people were mostly from schools of education, and so on. All the people from the 2-year schools were from child development programs. And I'm a political scientist by training, and so but I was Dean of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and my department was responsible for teacher education, and we created an alt-cert program that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, bit to dust later. But so I served on first of that, so that's one of the reasons why it's sort of near and dear to me. The other is that I'm also the coordinating board's representative to SBEC. So I serve on the State Board for Educator Certification. And so these all discussions about EPP programs and so on and so forth are, I find fascinating. I didn't know I would that much until I actually got on the SBEC and started listening to this. So, at least 6 times a year I go over there and spend all day long debating the great issues of education. Well, that's not true. Every once in a while we debate a great issue about education. Most of the time we just diddle around in people's lives and try to figure out whether they can be certified or not and whether they should be certified. But having served on that first committee, I think there's a couple of things to add to this first presentation, and that is that what separates the Associate of Arts in Teaching from a field of study is the fact that it is an Associate of Arts degree. So you're not just asked to think about what the field of study is in terms of what kind of courses the students need to be prepared to be successful at the upper division level. And in this case, primarily to be successful in an educator preparation program. But also, you have to sort of fill up that whole 60 hours of it. And that's different, and that was originally based on what is still by and large the case, and that is that you don't actually get admitted to a school of education until you're a junior. So what do you do the first 2 years? And it was originally created to a great extent as a recruitment device. because, you know, a lot of teachers quit between years 3 and 5, right? And a lot of that's because in the old structure, the way things were done, you didn't get to actually meet students until sometimes your last semester in the program. You're about to graduate. You go do student teaching. You think to yourself, what have I done to myself? And then it takes you 3 to 5 years to find your next job. Maybe sometimes less, sometimes more, but then you get out. And so part of the reason behind creating this in the first place was as a recruitment tool to figure out a way to get people as freshmen at least introduced to the profession and exposed to it. So this was a question that came up in the first one, so I'll go ahead and this may very well come up here, so I'll go ahead and address this now. As most of you, especially from four-year schools, know, there is in statute, and I just read this again this morning. I was actually answering some other question about something, but this came up. There is in statute that you cannot require more than 18 hours, right? So this vexes the hell out of everybody, and I can see why, by the way, particularly since that statute was passed, I don't know, 20 years ago now, or so it's part of the same law that did away with bachelor's degrees in education, which is why they're now under multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, all right? Part of that same legislation limited EPP programs to no more than 18 semester credit hours. There was also an agreement, by the way, that said you can, I don't really understand this, but that you couldn't have a degree program of total more than 139. So 120 plus 18 equals 139, I guess. And I don't know if that's a testament to how well people in the legislature can add, or there was some other reason behind the 139 as opposed to 138, but you can't have more than, you know, but anyway, so it's still, by the way, this 139 thing was done by letter of agreement between coordinating board and TEA, and as far as I know, it's still in effect. And we have programs all over the state that exceed 120. So I get asked about this a lot. And the reality is, if you have a good reason for going beyond 120 hours, I'll let you have one beyond 120 hours. And teacher preparation may be one of them. But one of the questions that arose then is, if you put education courses, EDUC courses, we currently have 1301, 2301 in fields of study, and you put those in there, does that count towards your 18 hours? And the agreement then was, no, it would never count towards your 18 hours. Now, I'm not real sure how. So strictly legally speaking, that agreement was made, but it was, and I'm quite willing to still honor that, so that anything that doesn't wind up in your, anything that winds up at the lower division level will not count against the upper division level. And the other thing I would like to point out is that one of the hopes that came out of that committee was that particularly educator preparation programs and schools of education would really look at what they were doing and use this as a vehicle for taking some of their curriculum and moving it into that 1301 and 2301, which would allow them to add more to their 18 hours on the other end. And as far as I can tell, that's never happened. Maybe in some isolated places it has, but not systematically. But that opportunity is still there to do that. Now, having been on my soapbox for a few minutes, I have now lost track of what your question actually was. But it had to do with educator preparation programs, I believe. And I think I just answered it at least partially.
TPA, no.
So.
It had to do with it.
Okay, so I think, you know, but this is distinguished by a couple of things. This is an associate's degree designed for that full first 2 years. So really think carefully about what is it that people need to do to then move on and be successful as a teacher. You know, we, those of us in higher education, just before coming down here, I talked to a guy from an institution in Texas who was griping about grade inflation primarily. And, you know, we point a lot of fingers, and oftentimes for higher education, the most convenient scapegoat is to point to public education, you know, in secondary and primary education and say, well, you know, if they would just turn out better people, we wouldn't have this problem. And there is some truth in that, but it's not the whole story, right? You know, we need to turn out better people too. And I know that EPP programs, the preparation programs are under a lot of pressure. Particularly over the years, what has happened is there's been more and more mandates to teach stuff in that 18 hours that one could argue doesn't actually have anything to do with pedagogy and instruction. And in fact, I just reviewed a bill last week that would add some more to that, all right? And none of it was about pedagogy or instruction. It was all about things that actually make a lot of sense in terms of trying to help identify students who may have mental health issues, learning disabilities, and that kind of stuff, some of which, by the way, is already in the law. But it added to that. And while I think all of that is certainly worthy and noble, and it would be tremendously helpful, the earlier you can identify students with problems and so forth. My oldest daughter is dyslexic. We didn't find this out until she was in high school. Okay. And fortunately, hers is not very severe. But I've never seen anybody in my life read slower than she does. Now, on the other hand, her comprehension is fantastic. But as I told her, hell, if you're reading that slow, your comprehension should be fantastic, right? But, you know, but it was a problem, and she got some training and learned the coping skills and so forth. So all of this is terribly important, but it still crowds into that 18 hours, you know, and that means that something then has to go, because you still only have so many hours in the day no matter what. So something has to go, and what we've done is by and large, we've wound up sacrificing some instruction in pedagogy and curriculum and that kind of thing in an effort to meet these other mandates. So if this can give you a little bit more breathing room, using the AAT wisely both at the 2 and the 4-year level, I think could probably help with getting students on the front end that will either bail out early or they will stay, and it might even help you with some of the curriculum and instruction issues you wind up with on the other end as well. So I think there is some promise in this, so take all of that. So please take this very seriously, and in the end, you know, we need to do what's best for students.
This is Teresa Wallace. My concern is, as you were saying, that the state's been under pressure for certifications. Teachers are failing the certifications. They're not passing. They're changing the test, or they're trying to change the test. So, I mean, that all is going to affect in what we do here, because as they're changing, you know, certification tests, as more teachers are failing, that affects the universities. And then the universities are trying to, you know, produce more teachers at the passing rate, and that affects us. And it's like constantly changing. And I know we need to review this every 3 to 5 years, but I guess I'm just worried about, you know, the state changes the certification tests, the EPP programs start to change theirs, and, you know, our numbers, even though we do this, the universities change it, and then it's like we lose students. I feel sometimes we lose students because of all the confusion about what is Texas certification doing, what are these educator programs doing, and then they're not going to accept the classes we have because now they're failing the test and the universities are changing that. I don't know how that's going to affect. I know you probably don't have a crystal ball to tell me, but I guess how the Texas is going to change the teacher certification tests, the failure rate of a lot of teachers, how's that going to affect what we're doing here?
Well, we haven't solved that problem yet. I don't know that we will. I mean, I think part of it has to do with currency sometimes of these things. And so a lot of people find this surprising, but field of study legislation has been in the law since 1999. So this has been in effect for almost 20 years. Most people never heard of it until the last couple of years or so. Part of that is because the coordinating board, probably now going on 13, 14 years ago, did about 10 of these things, put them out there, and then just let it sit. And we did the same thing with AAT. And then finally, there was a revision in 2009 because EC33 was dropped. I mean, part of the reason the AATs were created in the first place is because EC33 became the best thing since sliced bread at that time. It was going to solve all of our educational problems. And then, you know, if you live long enough, you know, you'll see all kinds of stuff come back around again, some good and some bad. I keep waiting for bell bottoms to show up again, but then secretly hoping that they don't, right? But So it's not just fashion that does this, everything else does too. So we're back to an EC through 3, and I think part of what we're going to have to do a better job of is trying to make sure that they stay current. And so Alan mentioned the fact that we're going to set up a review schedule that's based on a minimum of 5 years. But we're also going to set up a system where there'll be criteria set up, or we'll give some triggers or whatever you want to call them, so that if we need to review before 5 years, we can. And that would include, if you do it this year and God forbid SBEC changes something remarkably and you got to review it again next year, then we'll come back and do that. So I think part of that is trying to be current. I think that SBEC has been operating under a charge from the board itself to, and the legislature, by the way, to try to hold educator preparation programs more accountable for what they do. And I don't know how many of you follow this very closely, but there are 7. When I first went on SBEC a couple of years ago, one of the things I noticed is that by law, there's been 7 indicators of effectiveness for EPP programs in the law for quite some time now. SBEC was using 1 of them. And they're now proposing to use 3 and then ramp that up. But part of it is that they want to ramp that accountability up. At the same time, they're also reviewing all of the certifications. And as an aside, though, this would be something that I would, as an SBEC member, I would be interested in hearing from y'all, and y'all can do this. You can send this to me privately or see me during a break or come up to office or whatever, about the frequency with which those things are done. We're always messing around with some certification or another every time we meet, and we meet 6 times a year. Now, I know there's a lot of certifications, which also, I must admit, as an outsider sort of looking in, I have to wonder whether there are too many of those and whether all of those are really necessary or not. And maybe they are. I don't know what the answer to that is, by the way. It's just a question that I have. But the other is the frequency of change. And I was in the Permian Basin a while. This has been several years ago, well, about probably 4 years ago now, and I served on this panel, and it was about public education. And one of the things that one of the teachers said, which goes back to, I was at a college and we went through a lot of changes, and the vice president, when I was a dean, this vice president said, well, we just need to make the routine. And I said, yeah, well, Frank, we'd have to do something twice in a row. We'd have to do something the same way twice in a row to make it routine. First of all, that's our immediate challenge, is to do that. And sometimes I think that things like teacher education, which are so subject to fads, and it comes through legislative changes and so forth, that once something happens, you hardly get the opportunity to really let that settle down and test the effectiveness before somebody decides we need to do something different. So we have STAR and EOCs, and we don't have those anymore, and now we have other stuff. So I think part of it is trying to get everybody to settle into a place where we can stay for a while, and really look at what's effective and not. And I think the same is true of certifications and the testing as well. So I'll try to keep a closer eye on that.
Well, the constant changing for teacher certification is counterproductive to the 60 by 30, because it's constantly changing. The universities change it, then we have to change it. So a student having to graduate the 60 by 30 is counterproductive when you're constantly changing the teacher certification. And I mean, it's a great goal, but I think that it's counterproductive when every couple of years you're changing. And I know it's driven by different things, but it's changing the teacher certification. It has to change at the university level, and then it changes. And so I think and I know everybody has a different opinion on how to best prepare teachers, but that certification is changing constantly, and that's discouraging to the students, and as taking classes they don't need, and by the time they transfer, it changes again, so now they need to take something else. And so they spend a lot of money and time, and some of them leave the teaching field because of that, because it's constantly changing. But, I mean, I know it has to be changed, but, that's just that comment that is, to me, if this constantly changes, it's counterproductive to this.
I'd like to follow up on something that you said, too, because of the changes. I find that my students are taking multiple courses because when they transfer to a university, one university says, well, we'll accept the AAT, but we're really not going to apply all those courses because we really wanted you to take this science or this. And so I have students repeating courses and come back and tell me, but you said if I finish this AAT, and I say, well, that's what they told me too, because I don't feel like there's anything that can be held.
Well, actually, there is.
Okay.
And part of the problem is that I hear this anecdotally a lot, but there are two things. One is that in my career in higher education, I've only actually, and have evidence of it, twice. And one is my own experience. And I sat down with a vice president from another institution when I was a vice president of instruction. And we talked about this, and at the end of the meeting, he finally said, so Rex, so what is it you want me to do? And I said, Bill, I just want you to follow the law. That is all I'm asking you to do. And we ended the meeting on that note. About 2 weeks later, I got an email that said, we will now accept so-and-so. And what happened is he'd gone back and looked at the law and said, oh, so, but the problem is that, you know, so to speak, we need to know who the perpetrators are. I mean, it's like, as a supervisor I've been a department chair, a dean, and a vice president, and there's nothing worse than someone coming in to make a complaint, and the first thing they say is, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Stop right there. Don't tell me anything more, because depending on what you say, I may have to get them in trouble. Because there are laws for like racial and sexual harassment, for example. So if you tell me too much, then I may not have any choice but to get them in trouble. And so if you really don't want to get anybody in trouble, then don't tell me anything. Now, is that really what you want to do? And people, and I get this, right? Nobody wants to throw anybody else under the bus and so on. And I understand that. I'm not real keen about it myself. And I think part of what happens is that we don't, so if you tell me institution so-and-so doesn't appear to be doing what they're supposed to be doing, then I'll look into it, remind them of what they're supposed to be doing, and 99 times out of 100, that solves the problem. But they need to know in the first place. And I'm not going to tell them who reported it and where it came from and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to say, look, it's been brought to my attention that you're not doing this. And maybe they're not, maybe they are. I mean, I got one complaint about this a while back, and it turned out that the complaint itself was unfounded because the community college, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. This was not the four-year institution's fault at all. They were telling kids that, no, you can transfer and go into an engineering program and you don't need calculus. Like, well, no, somewhere along the line you need. So, but part of it is sort of knowing where to look without actually, levying charges and bringing a lot of acrimony into it, but just find out, look, so what's going on here? Tell me. And most people, once they find out what they're supposed to be doing, then that's what they do. Most of us operate out of an awful lot of ignorance every day of our lives, and oftentimes we just don't know. But when somebody tells us, we go, oh, okay, then we'll do that.
Yeah,
but I have heard a lot of this, but we need to know that. If it's happening, we need to know where.
And I don't know if it's happening, everywhere or not, but I know a lot of students, when they transfer to other places, core complete is not core complete. And when I got hired 18 years ago, that's what I was told. And nowadays, it's not core complete. And we advise them, and they go to the different colleges, and everybody's like, well, I have to come and take this over. Now I have to take this over because core complete is not core complete.
Well, it is. But again, if I don't know who they are, I can't do anything about it.
Okay. Can you send your PowerPoint out so we can have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and keep something in mind about the core curriculum. While the core transfers and you can be core complete, that doesn't necessarily mean that the courses you took in the core will apply to your degree program. In that case, it does. But in all other cases, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But if that's not what's happening, then we need to know about it. And then we can, and I think a part of this is just through, people change. It falls out of use and so forth. But, so we've launched a little mini campaign for awareness, and we'll do more with that as well. But we recognize that's a problem, and we're working on it.
Thank you, Rex. I'm going to zip super fast through this. These are just some sample fields of study, what they look like. This is really not so relevant to us because we're picking an AAT degree, and we need to fill up all of the 18 hours. But this is an example of a kind of a typical one, what they look like. This is social work. This is an example of a field of study that created a new course, an academic cooperative, just for their field of study, and had it added to the ACGM. This is a much bigger field of study. This shows you just kind of how complex they can be. This is business administration and management. This is a field of study that applies to several other fields, like finance, for example, accounting. Excuse me. This is a very small field of study, just 12 special credit hours, and it's actually smaller than it appears because these courses overlap with the core. The federal government courses, the Texas government courses can double dip and count towards the core and the field of study at the same time. So this is really a very tiny field of study. But the committee felt like you don't want to add more courses than necessary, so the student can, when they're finished with this small field of study, can go ahead and transfer and get on with their degree. And my last slide is just to encourage you to do what you can to make sure that the field of study is used and that it's effective. Institutions by state law have to accept the courses in the field of study, but there's nothing in the law that says that they have to offer these courses. So it's going to be a headache for those institutions that don't offer these courses because they're going to have to map their existing courses onto everything in the field of study. It'd be a whole lot easier if they just went ahead and offered those courses and made them part of their own degree programs. So that's what we are encouraging institutions to do. We also encourage the two-year institutions to support these fields of study by offering sufficient sections and advising degree plans. Again, probably not really an issue with the AAT degree. So if you have any questions or comments about this as time goes on, and if you or your colleagues have questions about how to implement this, how to use it, how to make it most effective, please let me know, and I'll be happy to work with you. We're coming out with an implementation report. It'll be out in the next few weeks, where it's a guide for university presidents and provosts, also for department deans and department chairs, and also for advisors and faculty, broken down by each of their responsibilities of what the field of study is, what are some of the frequently asked questions we get about it, what are the frequent misunderstandings about fields of study, what does the law say. And we're hoping that that will clear up some issues. But that will probably raise some new questions as well. So we encourage you all to stay in touch. And that is that. And with this, I will turn it over to our co-chairs to get us started on the meat of our discussions here. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. I will start off by saying that a few years ago, was it Dr. Loftus, was it 2014, 15? We had a smaller meeting, something like this, when we went through and reviewed education and TECA courses and formed learning outcomes that came out of the ACGM. And that was an opportunity for 2-year and 4-year institutions to kind of start a conversation. And I think after that meeting, when we all sat around the table, it kind of changed the way or the direction of the conversation. And sometimes we approach this as a us versus them. And that meeting gave us an opportunity to understand that we're talking about the same student. Patrice and I were talking about this earlier. The student starts with me and ends with her, but in the end, it's the same student. And so I want to make sure that we keep that in mind as we move about today's work. If you're wondering kind of how the agenda is going to go, we discussed a few things. And if you look at the worksheet that Alan gave us, that starts off with the checklist. Ideally, I say that because we're all educator people, and we know how an agenda goes, but ideally, we'd like to look at the first 2 or 3 questions as a part of a review, kind of break into some smaller groups that will focus on specific areas, and then look at question number 5 as maybe homework, because that question asks us to look at a core curriculum at our institution and look at some overlap, and then finish 6 and 7 tomorrow. And so today we're just going to kind of start again with discussion and some group work, and then tomorrow will be decisions after we've done a little homework. So we're going to get started with the very first question. That's a part, again, of the checklist. And that question, yes, ma'am.
Just a little more, because we've been saying EC3, EC3, and we still have EC6. And,
We're going to talk about that.
I don't know, across the state, but I know with my fellow colleagues in San Antonio area, many of us are not going to the EC3 because the school districts don't want the EC3. So I think if we look at this, I think we need to look at it from EC6 rather than EC3. And I don't know if anybody else has another point of view.
Well,
Well, I'm saying that the majority of the universities, and there are several universities here, and they can speak to their own, are staying only with the EC6, not an EC3, a certification.
Well, it's not all of them, because I know several that are going to
Yeah.
EC3, and I think we have EC6, we still need to have EC6.
so,
Add EC6 to
Right.
yeah, the worksheet just has the EC3, but when we break up into working groups, we're going to combine EC3 and EC6 so that those two plans are considered together. And then if the group wants to spin off into some subgroups beyond that to consider more specifically for EC3 versus EC6, we can do that. But we have to keep an eye on the fact that we're for the four-year university, what we're looking at here are the prerequisites, for the most part, that our students are coming in with, and how can we make that flexible enough, because students may not even know where they are going and what's going, where they're going to be transferring to, and which of those options are available. So I think looking at them together, at least initially, is probably wise. And we also don't know what TEA is going to do in terms of EC3 versus EC6. Are they going to do away with EC6? Or, we don't know. Right now they're saying no, but again, it changes all the time. So that's how we're going to handle that, at least initially when we're breaking up into the small groups, and then we can go from there and determining if we need to split that up into subgroups.
I have a question. I think it might be for Rex. So we currently list ours as EC through 6 and 7 through 12. So if I have a student that wants to come back and say this school is not accepting it, but they're 4 through 8, does the wordage have to be the same for the field of study?
Well, I think the answer to that's probably mainly yes. And so, but let me say something about EC through 3 and EC through 6. I really don't think EC through 6 is going to go away anytime soon. And there was a lot of discussion in SBEC about it. And I think the reason for that is that everybody recognizes why EC through went away in the first place. Because then we had EC through 3, basically, and then 4 through 8, and then 7 through 12. And it went away because of the impact it has primarily on rural districts or semi-rural. But the smaller the district is, the greater flexibility they want, right, in being able to assign people. And so I think that SBEC, we talked about this a lot at SBEC, and I think everybody recognizes that doing away with EC through 3 in the first time, creating it and then eliminating EC through 6 and 8 that existed and going through this 4 through 8, which is, you pointed out in the conversation we had before, part of that was an attempt to try to really deal with the differences between the three. And so, I think there are real differences between first graders and sixth graders. some good, some bad, but there's real differences in their cognitive abilities, in their learning and everything else at that point. And so I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. Now, I can't promise you anything. I know that as a member of SBEC, I would resist that because I think that everybody's going to need that flexibility. And while rural school districts can be small in terms of sheer numbers, we still have 3 million people living in rural areas, and we got a lot of districts out there that need the ability to deal with that. And so I think some of your larger urban areas and universities that are tied really closely to them may decide they don't want to do EC through 3, but I think others will, especially those that still have a lot of rural presence with superintendents and principals out there that need the flexibility. But I think, you raised a really interesting question about this, and so I'll think about that some more and get back to you in the morning about it. But it raises a really interesting question about it, and typically the way we thought of it is, it's identified with a major. And in this case, this is different because it's one thing to say, well, the field of study for accounting applies to accounting majors. Well, you have a direct relationship there. And this is trickier because this is not really connected to a major per se. It's really connected to certification levels. So I think that the answer to your question is probably yes, but let me think about that a little bit more and see if there's some way to address that. That doesn't because the one thing I would be worried about then is that on the other end, you'd be asking people to accept things that doesn't really fit. And I don't, so we don't want that, but we also don't want to create artificial barriers either.
Well, I think it's a really relevant question because we are planning to have a 4-8 working group this afternoon for that very reason, that in some ways 4-8 is more like EC elementary, but in other ways those degrees are more like secondary in that they are content specific except for the generalist, which hardly anybody takes. We discourage students from doing that actually because passing that test is really hard. And so the prerequisites that are needed for somebody who's doing English language arts social studies versus someone doing math science or math and science or math or science, because they're composites also. Those are very different sets of prereqs because they're going to be taking upper division courses in those subject-specific areas to a greater extent than the EC3 or EC6 folks are. So that's what our plan is right now in terms of the broad working groups we're going to get started with this afternoon.
Just so you guys know, that was the first question that came up when we were over there with Alan and Rex. So we definitely understand what you're saying. So the first question asked us to review the existing education courses, which there's Education 1300 or 1100, 1200, 1300, and then Education 1301 and 2301, and have a discussion around whether or not those should be in the field of study that we are working on. And that kind of goes into question number 2 on looking at if there are topics that aren't covered. And so that's our first question, topic for discussion. Go ahead.
One of the things that we did is we changed our, when I got to Midland College, we had the elementary and then we had the secondary, and we just combined that, and those 18 hours include the Education 1301, 2301, and then those extra 12 hours, they have to meet with me and talk about their major. So we've got a group of classes that are required depending on if they're going secondary, if they're going elementary, that kind of thing. So we just kind of collapsed it and then really did some focused advising for those classes.
So are both of you saying that regardless of certification area or level, that the existing education courses should be a part of the field of study?
Sandra?
Did I start over? No, but maybe when we get into those groups that we can have those discussions, because I think what you might find is that there are, I know at our university, our 4-8s are called our CIMEs for middle level, and we've really developed many of those courses around middle level learning. So I don't know. I mean, I do think there is a general, for our majors, which are in EC6 and 4-8s, I think the major, I think we'd have an easier time of being able to pull those in. I do think there will be differences when you only have 18 to 24 hours in a secondary field.
Any other comments or questions regarding the current education courses? This part, Susan.
I'm a little confused. Someone mentioned that they took the two education courses, but on the other ones, they customized it. It was my understanding that those 5 courses had to be those 5 courses and you couldn't make any substitutions. Am I not correct on that?
The applicability of them, that is true. I don't want to try to guarantee the applicability of statutes, then you can.
Well, but I think the question then is, does that include the minor? Because we're not responsible for the major, we're only responsible for the pedagogy of the minor for high school.
So I think, Susan, your question is around the current AAT.
The current AAT
Right.
and the 5 courses that are considered to be the education pod, not the core.
Right.
That we can't change those. We can't substitute anything. You can't say, okay, we've got the math 1350. Well, I think we want to just do calculus instead. That we don't have that option. It was given to us as a whole, and we couldn't make those changes.
Right.
Was she talking about 7 through?
No, she's talking about, yeah.
Right.
And those courses in the electives, the 1301 and 2301 are the 2, but if they're doing secondary, then I let them choose their major courses. Like if they're going to do history, if they're going to do English, then those are their electives. Whereas if it's EC through 6, it is the math 1350 and 1351, yeah.
That's helpful. Clarification there. Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the handouts that was sent to us is that list of the current AAT and what it's distinguished between an EC6 version, a 4.8, and EC12 special ed, and then secondary as a huge clump. So I think when we're talking about all this, we would do well to kind of specify which of these that we're talking about. We're going to continue this discussion just a little bit when you get into the groups. I think it'll be a little bit easier when you get with folks who are focused on one of these areas, grade level bands, as TEA likes to say. But just in terms of our broader discussion, we want to move on to question number 2 that's on the worksheet, which is there any essential course content across all of the multidisciplinary studies majors that's not reflected in any of the courses that are in the ACGM? So is there anything that you think could be added or should be added? And we just kind of want to get a general sense of thinking, if you have any ideas right now. More of this is going to bubble up as you get into the smaller groups. Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm understanding your question right, do we feel like there's something that should be covered that isn't being covered in that basic core? So in our institution, we have 2 areas that students do very poorly in. And one is social studies, and this is our EC6 group when they're taking the content exam, and also science. So it is our conversational over time and with quite a bit of reflection. I'm not sure it's been that the cause of this, that they come in with a spotty education, that they come in to our program, and in fact, they probably come into the 2-year institution with a spotty background in social studies for any number of reasons. Now, our institution is at a very rural part of Texas, and we all know how stretched rural districts really are. It's amazing what they end up doing, and that's a reality, right? So waving our magic wands, as it were, we would love to see some sort of an integrated social studies course in the before they get to us that helps them recall, that reviews and probably teaches for the first time some of the things that they must have in order to have that foundation to be an adequate teacher of the social studies for an elementary classroom. Same with science. So, you know, our wish list, golden wish, would be to have 2 courses added for that, where they review and they basically it would be a review course plus having some of the teaching of social studies or the teaching of science, which of course is disciplinary and specific to those areas.
And you're talking specifically about the EC6.
I am, yes, ma'am.
I have a follow-up to what she said. I also think because let's take science, for example. Science is so broad, and what the student takes and what the options are. I almost wish our committee would narrow that down so that we're following what the Texas exam is asking for, because I also think that they come as a freshman and might take, or, you know, science. They're not going to see that test for how many years later, and was it even the right test? I mean, astronomy. I mean, it's not going to be on the Texas exam, but they got credit for it. You know, so it just depends to me. I think that's important to look at too. Like, what are we asking specifically?
Go ahead.
I just want to ask, to what degree do we need to consider the format of this field of study for those who decide, I don't want to be a teacher? So how can we ensure that these courses that are in the field of study can apply to some other major?
That's a good question, but I'm not sure that's our job. I think our job is to make sure that students who do this thing are then able to continue doing that same thing with as little challenge when they move to 4-year as possible. That's the way I understand. That's
also kind of part of what your homework, first day of class, is to look at the integration of these courses for the core curriculum. It could very well be what Amy said, is that we've got 15 sections of numbers in science that a student can choose, but if you're EC through 6, we say these are the sciences that you take. And so while that's an opportunity to focus what we have in our field of study on an EC through 6 level, it also fulfills the core requirement. And so there are going to be some opportunities there, maybe the social sciences or the humanities, the language and culture. But for the 2 education classes, it's kind of hard for those, just like those nursing students would get.
I know what we did is we had, I advised students to take the life earth science and the physical science if they're going to teach. Now, and the life earth science is up there for everybody, but on our registration, it says only for teachers. And so our division chair goes through, and anybody who's not an AAT major gets dropped. And so we dropped that because we had some, we did the life earth science, but we've had some issues to our transferring university, so we had to drop that. So now it's just biology and physical science. But I mean, I know this may be a lot of work, but we have math for teachers. There's a geometry for teachers. Why not a science for teachers that works with the universities and what they're going to be teaching? Because as some of you said, a student decides to take biology. You know, they don't know if they want to teach. Half of our students don't know what they want to do. They take that biology or astronomy or zoology, and then their second year, they decide they want to teach. Well, now they took, again, being counterproductive to 60-30, oh, now I'll have to take physical or life earth science for teaching. Or let's take a math, or like we have math for teachers, geometry. Why not a history for teachers that focuses on the certification tests, focuses on lesson plans, focusing on specifically. Now, the problem is if they decide they don't want to teach, that's a chance they take. They decide, okay, I don't want to teach. I mean, I don't know. Again, it goes counterproductive to 60-30, but I mean, I don't know. We either have to be very specific, or maybe that's something they take later on after their first year of basics. I don't know. But the other thing I would like to see, and I know they were talking about this, I think the introduction to family relations and multicultural, I know there's multicultural foundations and multicultural society, but I think the introduction to family relations is important, and in there talking about multicultural concept, because we focus, and I know we're focusing on the test and everybody needs to pass the test, but when you get down to it, and this has always been my philosophy in education, we have to teach the whole child. A child who's been sexually abused the night before cannot sit there and concentrate on science. A kid who's hungry cannot concentrate on science. You know, it doesn't matter what great science teacher you are at math. If a kid is being abused, if a kid is a lot of stuff that's going through, no kid is going to be able to pass your course no matter how great of a teacher you are. We need to understand the family dynamics. We need to understand the multicultural concept. I think teachers need more of that. They get out there and they're not prepared for that sometimes. And I understand this is what the state's looking at as a certification, but the mental health y'all were talking about, we need more of that. I mean, when I was teaching in high school, that was always my focus, was the mental health. A kid cannot come in if they're cold or hungry and focus on schoolwork. So, and
in the code, mental health, substance abuse.
Yeah. But we don't really have a specific class. And the last thing is maybe ASL, starting to offer ASL.
I was going to say that.
In language, there's not anything. I mean, Spanish is great, all of that, but what about some ASL for students who in special education maybe just have, amplifier? Maybe they could help if the teacher knew some sign language instead of taking them out and sending them somewhere else. So I would like to see that in the future added too.
I would like for us to, from this sheet, I'm seeing several courses that are missing that are very appropriate for the younger children. I'd like for us to look again at the TECA courses that were specifically designed for early childhood education. TECA stands for Texas Early Childhood Articulation. They will articulate to universities. They are appropriate instead of just a general dietary therapy class for that wellness class. There's an appropriate TECA class. There's appropriate one for growth and development, so that first you understand about the children you're going to be teaching. You can't teach them until you understand them. So a lot of these things you've been mentioning are already there. We don't have to develop some new classes. We just have to include them.
Well, a lot of universities stopped taking them, and so that's one of the reasons, at least at the Vernon College, we stopped. I used to offer all those four, the TECA. A lot of universities stopped accepting them, so we don't offer them anymore. But I started teaching those four, the nutrition, the wellness, the growth and development, and so less universities started taking, but if more universities would take them, I think that'd be a great plan.
And they will if it's in the field of study, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So
And we got 2 of ours in our core, accepted in our core, so we don't have to deal with that problem. They're part of the core.
So part of the conversation that we're having now is actually what we're going to talk about when we break up into the small groups. So Barbara, I believe you have a question before we break up or a comment?
Are we still on number 2, an essential course
Yes.
content? Okay.
Yes.
I don't see this in any of the courses, but I haven't studied them. Dual language learning, what are characteristics of dual language learners? Because a lot of people don't understand that they will get bilingual education only until 5th grade. When people migrate as families, you've got children who come, in the greater Houston area, there are children that come to school that are learning language at school. They're only going to get ESL. But that was just a topic, dual language learners at a variety of ages.
Okay. Denise?
I love the idea of doing the social studies or science, but is that going to be too far away from when they actually take that exam? And I was thinking that classroom management might be a better course to be in the lower level.
I'd just like to speak to that. One of the things that we're thinking about is that they need to be taking their content exam quite a bit earlier.
Yep.
So we want to make it earlier, basically. I'm not sure exactly how much. It's still a work in progress, but we recognize that as an issue.
Sandra, go ahead, and then we're going to stop. And then we're going to stop whole group discussion. Most of the conversation has been focused on EC6 stuff, and so I think after this one comment, it's time to go ahead and get into those specific kinds of conversations. Except if anybody has something else they want to say that might relate to specifically, like to secondary kind of stuff. So, but go ahead, Sandra.
This is an EC6 thing as well. Some of the colleagues across have contacted me to ask that we look at Texas history because of the amount of Texas history that's in the social studies as part of the EC6 exam, that we look at including Texas history.
We've mentioned the exam several times, and I just want to give us the caveat that we know that the exams are changing. We are going to have a TPA or something like it, a performance assessment, and the content tests are also going to be changing because they're going over to Pearson, and they're going to have more not just multiple choice kinds of questions. Constructed response is the term I'm trying to think of. And so I think rather than like trying to pull up the test framework and looking at that, we need to stay focused on the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, because that's what any content or content pedagogy test by law has to be based upon. So we're going to be safest if we look at the TECs or TEKs in terms of content, making decisions about what content might go into, especially for EC6 where they have the core subjects, but it's also important for the 7 through 12. You know, what's the science, 7 through 12, science, life science or composite science or physics, math, whatever, what's in those Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, that really is what guides the course selection for upper division courses. And so what's going to prepare students for taking those upper division courses for those content areas? James?
I like to support Denise's comment about having a classroom management class in the field of study, because as we all know, that's one of the biggest complaints that principals have when teachers go out there, and the students who go out to teach, they're always saying, because we have data at our institution, because we're NCATE accredited, that they wish they had more classroom management experience or opportunities to learn about it. So if these courses don't count towards the 18 hours, I think that's a prime way to include it.
I guess I would say in response to that is if we can have a classroom management 1 and a classroom management 2, I could go along with that. But we embed that in our field experience right before student teaching, and it would be real. And we do that specifically because they need to be studying that while they're in those field experience blocks. So is there room for 2 classroom management courses? I don't know. I think that's something that the groups are going to need to talk about more specifically. Yeah.
But I was going to say, but that's what's unique about 1301 and 2301 is that our students are in the classroom. And some of them, it's the first time, and they don't know how to handle these kids. So an introduction course to classroom management and then following up on, again, it's similar. It was so long ago to 4.5 years later, when they're finally doing student teaching. So I think it's a good idea. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and we know experienced teachers are still learning. That's tough. Yes, ma'am.
This is a question related to 1301 and 2301. When they were initially designed, it was determined that the students would take these early on and not have the experience actually working with children, and they should be doing observation as their field experience, not hands-on. And is that still part of those courses, or it needs to be clarified because I'm finding contact, but it does, but
It's just described as contact hours.
contact hours, but we were told it was not direct hands-on participation because they hadn't been trained to do that yet. They needed to observe it before they could participate in it. So that has come from my campus, and what do we need to do? Are we supposed to still handle them like the TECA courses, which are observations, rather than early on require that they be in there doing activities and things when they haven't been prepared to do that? And I definitely support the child guidance, both individual and in groups, needs to be in one of the curriculums, whether it's the associate degree or the university. But too many teachers are leaving the profession because they have some perception that children are just going to sit there in their chairs and be nice, and that's all they need to do is respect them. We're not providing them enough on how to guide children in different environments.
I'm sorry. I just want to respond there. I think at our institution, we have a You Teach program for the secondary folks in math and science, and as freshmen, they can volunteer. When they're going to the program, they take a 1-hour course, and they're in the field, and they're required to teach a lesson, and they're required to interact with the students. And I think that's a good model to use perhaps in this field of study too.
But if we're being held responsible for that class and we're allowing them in the classroom and they're not supposed to be participating with the children, there's a liability issue.
Rex.
Well, excuse me, you're absolutely right. The original idea behind particularly 1301, but to some extent 2301 was to give students an opportunity to observe. Now, observation, participant observation, active observation, I mean, they tend to shade into each other. And so, and in listening to this, I mean, it is true. I've seen a lot of stuff from SBAC surveys that suggest that classroom management is, if not the number one concern, it is very high up on the list of concerns that teachers, after having been teachers after a certain period of time, a year, 2 years, 3 years, that they express it, they didn't get enough. So the idea of then having it twice and reinforcing it is probably not a bad idea. There really is something to the practice makes perfect notion. And those things are something that you practice. I mean, you can learn about it all you want to, but it's when you actually go out and try to implement that it matters. So I think there's some room here. I mean, I think you have to be very careful about, because you raise a good point about the possibility of liability issues. And of course, student teaching, you're often left on your own. Right? Now you have someone that's overseeing, but you get left alone a lot to teach the courses, and that's okay because that's what you're supposed to be doing. But that's not. I would argue that's probably not true of 1301 by any means. That you really need someone with them. But I know that doesn't happen all the time either. And so, but I think it's something worth. I think it's something that y'all should actually talk a little bit about if you're going to have participation, and I mean active participation at that level, what should that look like, and what should constitute that, or should it be strictly observation? But you're right, it was originally designed as an observation, not necessarily a student teaching
scenario. I know we're trying to break up into groups, but on a 1301 and 2301, speaking about that, is there any way that can be lower from the 16 hours? Because one of the problems, at least I'm having, because we do have MSU at our campus and we have Wayland Baptist, our students get placed, because they're at the very beginning, this is their first course, they cater to other colleges first, and then they place my students. And like this semester, students didn't get placed, they were due in December. They didn't get placed till November, trying to get their 16 hours in. And the other issue with 2301 is a confidentiality with SPED. They're stuck basically in the classroom, and I know there's inclusion, but to actually observe, special education students or observe an art or observe anything like that, it's impossible because of confidentiality with SPED. And so they're just doing observations, and they're not really observing too much in this far as special education. So I didn't know if those could be lowered to 8 to 10, or that's a whole different committee, and then what we could do for the 2301.
Hold on just a minute, Amy. I'll tell you, and Dr. Loftus, jump in here if I'm saying this wrong. But when we were working a few years ago on the learning outcomes and adding those, that's why we were very careful about what we said that a student in 2301 was supposed to do, what the learning outcomes were. So you'll see that they say things like describe characteristics of exceptional learners, or identify or recognize. And so we try to make it very broad so that if you get into a situation, whether it's, general education, special education, 504, an R meeting, that a student would still be able to understand what goes into an art meeting and how you identify or differentiate for a special education student, but not necessarily that they had to sit in a special education class and get that. And so we tried to make it, was anybody else in here on that group? We tried to make it as broad as we could, and so it could be that they're just exposed to those types of classrooms or learners, but they don't necessarily have to do
I have brought in guest speakers, DIAG and stuff like that, but it's the frustration is the students, I tell them do your background check as soon as day one opens, they do the background check, and then we don't get placed till, and then the teachers get upset with me and the principals because they show up in November saying they have to get this done in 4 weeks. And I know that's more a personal issue with the colleges and the universities and the school district, but I just, I've been doing that. I've been bringing special guest speakers in and stuff like that, but I didn't know if that could be lowered because.
Just remember you're looking at special populations, not special education.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I've been doing that, so they've been volunteering at different things, so I just
So
didn't know.
Title I schools, gifted and talented classrooms, bilingual, dual language, single gender, all of those fall under
Yeah,
2301.
We just can't get in there, but thank you.
I just wanted to say I don't want to lower it. When we first started the AAT back in the day, it was a higher number, and we have lowered it. And to me, the 16 is perfect. It's 2 8-hour days. That's what I do. And it's just a lot of work on my end, but I now have partnerships with campuses, and we don't go to school on Fridays. We only have school Monday through Thursday. Fridays are field day. I go with them. I'm there the whole day. They're in the classroom with a regular teacher. I have them paired up. They teach lessons. They all look at me wide-eyed when I first tell them they're going to do this as a freshman. But I have been able to wean out those who shouldn't be teachers way early on before they get to the university. So I think the hours are very important and critical.
And it doesn't have to be a school district. It can be anywhere you find children.
I thought it said P through 12. So our pre-Ks are part of the school district.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Could be.
okay.
So what we're going to do now is we are going to break up into 3 different groups before we move. What we're going to do during our group time is look at pretty much questions 3 and 4 on our worksheet. So in our groups, we are going to look at the levels and categories for the field of study coverage and determine how many we need. We've spoken about EC through 3 and EC through 6. And 4 through 8, and whether or not we need just one 4 through 8 or specialized 4 through 8s, and then 7 through 12. Keep in mind that question number 1, we said that our current education courses, 1301 and 2301, should be a part of the field of study. So we're looking at 12 hours that remain. Okay, and then question 4 asked about the field of study being completed outside of the core, but I don't think that question came up in 1, so we're going to look at just the 18 hours, not graduating without the core. So in your groups, you are going to look at the 12 remaining hours that we are going to review as part of the fields of study. We have 3 groups. Yes, Donna?
I don't think you addressed number 4.
Yeah, we haven't yet.
So I'm just saying, you're saying those 2 classes are part of the field of study, but there may be the possibility of expanding it to 66 hours, so we could get our content and those courses could be, I mean, are we saying it's outside of consideration whatsoever?
No, not completing the core. Right. Okay. So we have 3 groups. Based on your level of comfort and expertise that's been shared. And in these 3 groups, you're going to, again, look at the 12 remaining hours. So the first group is 1 group, but you might find it necessary to break up into 2 because you're EC through 6 and then EC through 3. And that is Crystal Burnett Sanchez, Daphne, and you said you go by Leanne, Barbara, Denise, Sandra, Teresa, and Susan. I'm sorry, Teresa Wallace.
And why don't we have you all at the front, first 2 rows on this side. You can, front row can kind of turn around, and I think that will work well.
Group 2 is the 4 through 8 group, and remember, you're looking at the remaining 12 hours and whether or not that's just going to be 4 through 8 or you're going to specialize your 4 through 8s. That's Anthony Brown, Brandon Fox, Amy Jones, Barbara Patton, Sharia, myself, James, Crystal, and Patrice.
And we will
maybe
skip twos.
skip 2 or 3 rows behind these first 2 rows on this side for the 4-8 group to convene across 2 rows again. So whoever gets back there first, stick out the 2 far enough away that we're not, that we can hear okay. There's not tables I'm seeing. Okay, why don't we have 4 through 8 go to the way back, as my kids used to say in the minivan days. 4 through 8 go to the way back on this, my right-hand side.
7 through 12 is Donna, Anna Mary, Sue, Amy, Belinda, Courtney, and Teresa.
And why don't you all just take the table, the back table on our left-hand side. Joanne?
And if we didn't call you, I think maybe there are 3 that we didn't call. Not allowed.
I think these were based on like what you checked off as your area of expertise. So who else didn't get called? So what would you say of early childhood?
I'm really easy.
Donna?
Thank you. Amy Jones.
Well, we've got to have some folks do do 712. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're gonna go. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
don't have the whole week.
Thank you all for that incredible work. Really interesting kind of strolling around and listening to the conversations. It's not easy, right? What we would like to do is have a very succinct summary from each group, just telling us how far you got in your task. Some groups feel like they're done and others are like, oh gosh. And then that's going to help us figure out where we are with homework and then where we're going to start hitting the ground running at 8:30 in the morning when we get here tomorrow. So why don't we start with our EC3 group and hear a report. Who wants to share?
Okay,
Go right ahead.
basically you just want to hear what 12 credit hours we designed, right? Oh.
If you got that far, yeah.
Well, first, we decided to split from the early childhood through grade 6 because we felt they were unique. And so what we developed looking at the ACGM and developing additional courses, we're going to include both TECA 1303, which is family, schools, and community, which met kind of the guidelines on one of the other courses that had community and culture and those types of things.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to, I think EC3, right?
EC3. Mm-hmm.
And then also TECA 1354, which is child growth and development, which goes through adolescence. That's the only TECA course that actually goes through adolescence. Then we want to combine into a new education course, a course called Teaching Math in Early Childhood, and it would contain the content of 1350 and 1351. But hopefully we could have, what did we decide? We really need an early childhood person to teach it. And then create a new education course with a new number titled Classroom Management and Integration of Content Strategies, which would pull everything from the pre-K guidelines and would work on each of those individually on how they should be taught with early childhood teachers, which is social studies, science, math, language, arts, and art.
What happened to 1301 and 2301?
Well, we were keeping those two. We were just working on the 12 additional hours. So we still have 1301 and 2301.
Okay, so those courses that you just described, the TECA 1303, 1354, and then these two new courses, the math that combines 1350 and 1351, and another one that's classroom management and kind of an amalgamation of content strategies across the subjects. Those are for the 12 hours, and we're keeping the two.
Yes. That's more than 12.
No, we
have 18 hours to deal with.
Well, all of us have 18 hours, but two of those courses are 1301 and 2301.
Yeah. So the 12 hours beyond the EDUC. Okay, let's hear from EC6, who's going to share.
Okay, well, we're still thinking about it, but of course, we left the EDUC 1301, 2301, math for teachers, 1 and 2, and then we added the Texas history. So again, besides the 2301 and 1301, math for teachers 1, math for teachers 2, we added the Texas history. And then the last 3 hours, we haven't decided. We are trying to figure out a science class, the foundations of science. That would be a new class that would be added that would be focused on the teacher teaching the science that they need to do to pass the test, or to add the 1354, the child growth and development, because we feel like that's a foundation. No matter what you're going to teach is a foundation, and we understand the university does teach, child growth and development, but just like you have to learn to read and write that foundation, we feel like that 1354 is a foundation, and you just keep building on it and keep building on it. So we are going to sleep on it, and we'll let you know tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, well, yeah, okay. So we're not going to discuss. We're going to we're going to hear. Okay, and I'm trying to I have something to say about that. 4-8, Crystal. Yeah. There you go.
Hello, hello. Oh, there we go. All right, so for 4 through 8, we spent a lot of time deciding whether we just want to do 4 through 8 generalist or split it up. And we decided, although it'd be easier for the college and advising to do generalist, but that's not the best for our students. So we decided to split them up. So 4 through 8 math, 1301, 2301, math 1350 and 51, and math 2312. Then we did 4 through 8 science with 1301 and 2301, biology 1308, physics 1315, chemistry 1311, geology 1301, physics 1303, and environmental 1301 with their labs. And then social studies 1301, 2301, history 2301, geography 1303, history 2311 and 2312. And then we did English language arts with 1301 and 2301, then English 1301 and 02, English 2311, English 2327, and English 2331. And we are going to finish up as homework. I can.
Did she have Texas history in there? 2306? I think I missed that. Did you have Texas history in that list? Yes. Okay.
So we have 31 certification areas. I'd just like to say that. We accomplished 3. What we find with the 7 through 12 is that the 2301 and the 1301 definitely should stay with each of the certification areas. So it's really focusing on the last 12. And what we find is that the student sits with an advisor, they look at a block of huge courses, and just based upon when it fits in the kid's schedule or whatever it could be is the class that they take. And we think that our role should be more prescriptive, and we would actually lay out and say, according to the TEKS, which is what we pulled up, what do these students need coming from the community college foundation level moving into the university? So I'd like to start first with the 7 through 12 English. The first class we all agreed on was British literature. It's 2321, American Lit, 2326, World Lit, 2331. The fourth course would have 3 options to choose from. The first option would be Creative Writing, 2307, Mexican American, 2351, and American 2, which is 2328. The second one that we started on was 7 through 12 math, and we felt this was quite simple for us, actually. We wanted to do pre-cal, which is 2312, calculus 1, 2313, linear algebra, 2318, elementary stats, which is 1342. Then we moved on to social studies, and we're sort of done. We all agreed on history, Texas history, which is 2301, World Civ 1, which is 2321, and we stopped there because we had some conversation about some options, and so that's where we're at. So we've halfway through 3 of 31.
This group has a really huge task for accomplishment in this short amount of, like 8 hours of conversation. So, Alan, do you feel like they need to have all of those content areas covered, or the most common, or most commonly taken?
Well, as I said at the beginning, you have to walk a fine line between the courses that you feel a student needs and the courses that are already there and have large enrollments and that are widely offered throughout the state. I sent you that database of all the courses in the ACGM and what their enrollments are and how many institutions offer those. So that needs to be considered when you specify the courses.
And we did. We pulled that out too to see. We were like, who offers this? How many times? We did pull and take a look at those.
That's great, because if a course is only offered at 2 universities and 6 colleges, I'm not saying you shouldn't put that in there. Put it in there if you feel in your bones that that's what all students need, and universities and colleges will adjust. But you also need to consider, well, why isn't that, if it's so obvious to us, why isn't it being offered everywhere?
One of the things, too, that we tried to do, especially like in the options one, where it had like 4 options, we tried to look at the core. And so a good advisor would hopefully go back and look and say, well, look, they have 4 of these. Make sure that out of the core, you're taking one of these. So they could actually double dip, hopefully, in that list.
Exactly. Yeah, that'd be great. Just a word of caution about adding new courses to the ACGM, which you can do, but it's a big step. If we add a course to the ACGM, this committee will need to come up with the course content definition of that. We'll need to be very clear about what we want those learning objectives to be. That will in turn be passed on to a separate learning objectives committee, like the one you served on. And they will have to meet again and develop the course objectives and the official language for that. It will have to get approved by the ACGM committee and then approved by the full board. So there are a lot of steps in that, and it involves a lot of adjustment at a lot of institutions and staffing issues and all kinds of things. And that might be something, I'm not an expert here, so forgive me if I'm out of line here, but that might be something that you want to check with your deans on, and also check maybe with somebody at TEA or certification about what the implications of a new course or 2 or 3 new courses would be on certification and how they, I don't know, just that's throwing a big rock in the pond, and there's going to be a lot of ripples. And there have been field of study committees who have invented new courses for the ACGM as necessary, and maybe that was the best thing to do. But it's a major step, so that will have to be a major point of discussion for us tomorrow if we add new courses, to be very specific about what we have in mind and be able to have a good argument in our back pocket for why that needs to be done. Please.
I know that y'all have done this in the past when you converted the 4 TECA courses from CDEC courses. Is it easier to do that process, to convert it from career technical course, CDEC, into TECA courses?
I'll defer to my colleague Andrew Lofters.
Yeah, from WECM to ACGM. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. They're the same course. They're basic. The TECA and the CDEC version are the same course, same content. If you have faculty that are WECM, that are teaching the WECM courses, most of them have master's degrees now in most of the community colleges, so it's not as big an issue, but I didn't know that process of if it would be easier, rather than us create new courses, would it be easier to take some of the CDEC courses and convert them to ACGM type courses? Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap up because our live stream has to end at 5 o'clock. I want to make sure that we are aware of what we are doing for homework. So in your groups, you have been working again. If you look at your checklist on what was question number 4, kind of also looking at number 5 at the same time, and that question asks if there are courses that you are detailing in your field of study that will also apply for a core class. For instance, 4 through 8 science had some. There was also some with English language arts and reading. So take a look at that. We will begin the conversation with that in the morning. And then move into question 6, which is looking at if it needs to be separated after you've worked in your groups a little bit, and then reviewing the current AAT curricular. Hopefully we can have those things done by 10. Hopefully, fingers crossed, and then we'll move into other conversation and wrap up before 12 o'clock. Any questions in like 12 seconds? Thank you. Ding, ding, ding. It's 5 p.m. Okay. Yes, it is 5 o'clock, and we are now adjourned. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to everybody. I hope you have a good hotel room, and